Shalom Aleichem. Welcome back to our third of our four-part series. I've been absolutely loving watching your recordings, the interactions in the group. I was talking to Jody this Shabbat, and I was telling her how much I learned from you. That's the truth. How much the conversation and the intellect and the depth that is brought to the table. I just want to thank you. Today, I figured we're a couple of weeks before Purim, but this is our final live online class before, actually. And then next week we have our interactive class. So I figured, what would be a good place if not to go into the Megillat Esther? And it definitely is part of the Tanakh, though so again, Tanakh stands for Torah, which is the 5 books of Moshe. The Nun is the Nevi'im, the 24 books. And then we have the Ch, at the end is the Ketubim. Today we're going to look at the Ketubim side of things, specifically Megillat Esther. I'm going to ask you, if you have your Tanakh, please take it out. If you don't, please feel free to go to safaria.org, open your Tanakh, and then go all the way down to Esther. That's where we want to find ourselves. Now I have to tell you, this year, I finally understood something that for a very long time I didn't understand. So for those of you familiar, tell me who is the protagonist, the antagonist. Who would you say is the heroine of the story of Esther? Who is not necessarily? Just throw out some names. Is that a guess? Oh, okay, very good. Tikva. Okay, for sure, Esther, right? We would definitely say the Megillah is named after her. The story, definitely, she is a heroine in the story from every end. At least that's what you would think. Tell me who the villains of the story are. Give me some names. And there are quite a few to go around. Haman, Achashverosh, who else? We got Haman, Achashverosh. Anybody else? Bigtan and Teresh. Tell me about Vashti. Where does she fall out on the spectrum? Okay, Haman's wife. Tell me about Vashti. So I grew up knowing Vashti was not.
Was that she made all of her servants run around naked, and then girls wanted her to show up at this party naked. No way. That's all I know.
Okay, so Tikva, you and I probably went to the same day school. My whole life I learned Vashti was evil and all the midrashim that come along with it, the different rabbinical teachings. Until a couple of years ago, somebody sent me an article titled Vashti, the Modern Feminist Heroine. And it was an entire, I can't tell you how many pages were wasted on explaining to me why really Vashti was the most forward-thinking feminist who wanted to emancipate women from the evil men. And if you look at the pushback in the Megillah, where the men are, you see, now that she didn't listen to her husband, now all the women are going to think they could be independent enough and not listen to the husband. And ultimately, Esther's the greatest weakling because she's a sellout to her fellow sisters because she ends up listening to Achashverosh. And I remember reading this and thinking, wow, that is a very interesting spin on a story. And I couldn't pinpoint, though, obviously I know what bothers me. Yes? But then this year I got a lot of clarity, and I'll tell you why. We're living in a world where yesterday, good and evil was very obvious. Right and wrong was very obvious. High and low, things were very clear and obvious. Definitions meant what they meant. Things were what they actually are. Today we live in a world where, well, we're not sure they're terrorists, maybe they're militants, maybe they're freedom fighters, maybe really we are committing and I'm looking at saying, wow, I now understand that when you want to see things through a certain lens, it doesn't matter what the actual content of the story is, you are able to twist it to fit your narrative. Yeah. Now, I want to for a second look at Vashti and say, maybe she's not wrong, right? Maybe she's somebody who living under the tyranny of a spouse like Achashverosh, maybe she really wanted to be an emancipated woman and maybe she really was a leader of a movement. And then I started thinking, well, how ridiculous and crazy is that? You see, I am all for equality. I want people to have rights. I want people to be able to be equal contributing members of society. What I will never be able to get behind is a movement that in an attempt to become equal needs to then oppress, hurt, vilify, destroy the opposite. And if you look at this story, to me, somebody once sent me an article. I get a lot of funny articles from people. This was a story of, the Dear Abbeys. So this was titled, not Dear Abby, Dear Rabbi. Dear Rabbi. It was Simchat Torah in our Bet Knesset. And this year, as usual, the women were not allowed to dance with the Torah. Okay, now to be fair, by us, we're equal opportunists. By us, nobody dances with the Torah. The Torah stays on the bima, and we all dance around. I'm so angry. Why am I so angry? When my husband was dancing with the Torah, I hated him. I hated him for everything he stands for. I hated him so much so that when he came to me to kiss the Torah, all I wanted to do is spit in his face. What should I do with these feelings? The response is irrelevant. I remember reading this question and thinking, what an absolutely chaotic society we have created. You see, I understand if you hate your rabbi. I understand if you hate the patriarchy. I understand if there are a lot of things that you struggle with. And I'm not telling you they're wrong. But if it's your husband that you're fighting against, last I checked, the husband and wife are on the same team. Last I checked, two healthy human beings who say we are both committed equally to this partnership means that we're both equal contributors to the partnership. So when in the world would I be jealous of my spouse? I understand if you're jealous of other people. I understand if you're angry at other people. But the one person who's actually your teammate, to then turn around and stab them for a different movement, to me seems ludicrous. And the flip side is true. If we're creating men like Achashverosh and Haman that then inspire reactions, what kind of world have we created? What kind of world have we created that either spouse, so I'm not just hating on the women, but both men and women are, instead of being the greatest teammates and contributors, are arch nemesis, are the greatest fighters. And that blows my mind. And for those of you not familiar, this is unfortunately a current events that's unfolding in the Jewish world, specifically in the religious Jewish community, where for the life of me, I will not be able to understand how what should be the greatest partnership between a husband and wife fighting together for justice, for whatever cause it is, has now become the dismantling of a family where men and women are being pitted against each other. And instead of saying, guys, we're on the same team. We're the same. We should be on the same team. Let's together go make change in the world. We're internally self-destructing. And that to me is where I see Vashti. I don't think you can divorce, and you're right, Tikva. Most of the rabbinic literature that we know about Vashti is not actually mentioned in the Megillah. But you can't divorce the rabbinic literature from a rabbinic book like Megillat Esther, which is why I believe you can't necessarily pick and choose. So, Vashti, that was my little side. But really, I want to talk about Esther, not so much about Vashti, and models of leadership. If you open up Megillat Esther, let's open to the second chapter. Chani, I can't believe it. I just saw your baby, and for a second, I was wondering how Yair got to you. For those of you not familiar, Chani's my niece. She has a baby that looks just like my kid. Open up your Megillat Esther, to Perek Bet, Pasuk Yod. So this is after Vashti is killed. She dies. And now we're searching for a new queen. In general, this is amazing. Achashverosh is one of the uglier characters. I know we always make him sound like a foolish person. He wasn't a fool. He was quite an evil character. And you see this not just in his behavior to his servants, but definitely to the women in his life, to everybody who's around him. So he's bringing all the women, and he finds Esther. He likes Esther. He wants her as his wife. What does Mordechai tell her? One thing. You're going to go to the palace. You will be there. You're going to be the queen. Don't tell him what nationality you're from. If you look at Pasuk Yod, it says, Lo higida Esther et ama vet moladeta. Esther did not reveal not her nation, not her birthright, where she's from. Why? Ki Mordechai tziva alea shelo tagid. Because Mordechai commanded her not to tell. Now, if you look a few psukim back, it's very obvious that Mordechai, so unlike Vashti and Achashverosh, who are arch nemesis, Mordechai and Esther very much are collaborative leaders in the Jewish community in completely different capacities, and yet they work seamlessly together. Mordechai tells her and it doesn't necessarily say why he tells her not to, but he tells her, don't tell who you are, don't tell your nationality, don't divulge your birthright. If you look a few psukim later in Pasuk Chaf, same perek, it says, En Esther magedet moladeta vet ama. Esther is already now living in the palace. She's already the queen. She still will not divulge who she is, where she's from, what her nationality is. Kasher tziva alea Mordechai. Vet ma'amar Mordechai Esther alse kasher hayta bo'omno ito. And there's a mutual respect, agreement, leadership, cohesive delegation of power. And Esther respects and Mordechai says, for the nation's security, don't reveal who you are. I think that one of the markings of a good leader is the ability to keep other people's secrets safe. When you're in the position of power, you very often know things about people that nobody else in the world should know. And you have the ability to destroy somebody's life and to really make sure to save somebody's life by making sure you're faithful, by making sure you keep your mouth shut. When somebody shares something in confidence, the assumption is they shared it with you because they weren't trying to share it with the whole world. If they wanted to share with the whole world, they could have gone to TikTok. It was much cheaper than you. If they wanted everybody to know, they would have taken a picture and put it on Facebook or Instagram or pick your social media platform. They came to you because they trusted. They trusted that not just your wisdom and advice would be able to guide them, but your ability to respect and sanctify the boundaries of confidentiality would save them from the public disgrace. And very often, unfortunately, we see that those who we should be able to trust are the most untrustworthy. And it's not just the big scandals that break out. It's the very small things that erode people's marriages and friendships and relationships with their children. So I'm very lucky. I, from both ends, have rules, both as a social worker and as a Rabbanit. But very often people will come over to myself or my spouse and say, oh, I spoke to your wife about, did she tell you? And the answer is no. No. Unless you told me, speak to your husband about it, or unless somebody said, can you please consult with your wife, why would he share? Why would we share? And we find this quality by Moshe Rabbeinu as well. If you will go into Bamidbar Yud Bet, so this is Parshat Behalotecha. Look at Bamidbar Yud Bet. I believe it is going to be Pasuk Zayin. So we're going all the way back to your Tanakh. This is right after the story of Miriam and Aaron speaking Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu. And we know that both Miriam and Aaron get punished for it. Miriam with more severity. And Hashem retorts to them the following. If you look at Pasuk Zayin, really, let's go Vav. Yeah, Hashem says, Vayomer Shimu na dvarai. Listen to me. Who do you think you just spoke about? You didn't just speak Lashon Hara about some random dude off the street. You know that all the prophets you know, the greatest prophecy they could have gotten was maybe in a dream, maybe in a vision, some kind of mysterious interpretation. Lo ken avdi Moshe. That's not my servant Moshe is unlike qualitatively any other of the prophets that you know. So it's not a quantitative difference. He's in an entirely different category. Why? B'chol beti ne'emanhu. In my entire house, he is known as the faithful one. What does it mean, the faithful one? And then Hashem continues, said, you know how I speak to him? I speak to him like I'm speaking to you. Like you're sitting across a friend with that clarity. But what's his defining character trait? Ki b'kol beti ne'emanhu. He's a faithful servant. The commentators say, what is he faithful? He knows Hashem's secrets. He knows what's going on. And yet he doesn't divulge them. Because part of being a good leader is knowing that if you're entrusted with somebody else's heart, then it's your obligation to hold it in the most sacred, safe space. I think that's something critical we learn from both Esther and Mordechai. Now I want to look at another part of Esther, which is not just this side of she knows how to keep secrets, she knows how to keep a low profile. Esther is a brilliant leader. And I think she understands something about human psychology that most people don't pick up on in the Megillah. If you can, go into Esther Dalid. So now let's move to the 4th chapter. Pasuk Aleph. Okay. So here, this is after the decree was sent out to kill all the Jewish people. And Mordechai HaTzadik, who was sitting at the Shaar HaMelech, he heard the news that the Jews are going to be annihilated. Now Esther, who's sitting up in the palace, didn't get the news. So what happens? Mordechai yada et kol asher nasa. He knew everything that happened. Vayikra Mordechai et begadav. He rips his clothing as a sign of mourning. Vayilbash sak ve'efer, and he puts on ashes and sackcloth. Vayetze mitoch ha'ir v'yizak zaka gedola umara. And he goes out into the street and he cries a bitter scream. Vayivo ad lefnei Shaar HaMelech, and he comes up until the gates of the palace. Ki en lavo el Shaar HaMelech b'levush sak, because he knows he cannot come dressed the way he is to the king. And at the end of the day, he's a king. So what happens? Meanwhile, the Jewish people, anywhere that the decree comes, what do the Jewish community do? Evel gadol Yehudim. The Jewish people know this is a terrible time. And they start mourning. They start doing teshuvah. Meanwhile, the maidservants of Esther come and tell her something's going on with the Jewish people. Something's not right. Mordechai is out wearing sackcloth, mourning. The Jewish people are fasting, crying. So what happens? She sends him clothing. Right? She sends him a change of clothing and summons him, come. Vatikra, if you look at Pasuk Hey, Vatikra Esther lahatach, misarisei hamelech, she calls Hatach, and she says, Vatitzaveu al Mordechai, she commands him, go to Mordechai, and find out, mazeh v'al mazeh, what in the world is going on. You know, sometimes I live on the West Coast, so by the time I wake up, I have like 3,000 WhatsApp messages from all my family, both in Israel and in the East Coast. And always after Shabbat especially, my first feeling is like, is everybody okay? Because there are like 3,000 messages, and all I have to see is like, is everybody okay? Here Esther, she comes late to the party. She says, what in the world is going on? So Hatach comes back with a message. He says, no, it's bad news. It's terrible news. The king commanded that the Jews are going to be massacred, and the whole entire Jewish people are really going to be wiped out. So what happens? Vatomer Esther, she goes, okay. Hatach comes back with a message and says, Esther, Mordechai sent a message back. He said that now is your obligation to go and rescue the Jewish people. Now is your opportunity to go and save your people. Her response, tell Mordechai that I've not been summoned to the king. And anybody, so it's not like today, you know, if you want to put up an ugly meme about your president, what's going to happen? Nothing. Try that in North Korea. Not going to work out so well, right? We don't really know what dictatorships are, thankfully, not at least in the United States. Even if you don't like the government, even if you don't like the president, we're light years away from a world where Achashverosh, he doesn't like you, you smile the wrong way, it's off with your head. She says, I haven't been summoned for the last 30 days. How in the world am I going to go in front of him and I'm not going to be killed? And Mordechai famously tells her something that every leader needs to hear. What does he say? Look at Pasuk Yud Dalet. Oh, Yud Gimel first. Vayomer Mordechai lahashiv el Esther. He tells Hatach, tell the following words to Esther. Al tidami b'nafshech limalet bet hamelech mikol hayudim. You know, you think you're in the king's palace? You think you live in Hollywood? No, I'm not talking. Right? You think you're in the protected category of human beings? So you can blaspheme against your own people, so you can make an embarrassment of yourself in public? You think that you can disconnect yourself from the Jewish people? I have to tell you, I'm learning a lot of things in current events that I never understood during World War II. And we should never be judged. Okay, so this is not a judgment call. I simply always wondered what motivated capos to be capos. For those of you not familiar, the capos were the Jews who had to buy their own Nazi uniforms with their own money so they could rat the Jews out, so that ultimately they themselves went to the crematorium the same way. And again, this is not me putting a judgment call. God forbid, I never want to be tested. But it's interesting today in 2024 to see the Jews who are so proudly a part of our nation and those who are absolute sellouts for themselves. It doesn't hurt us. Am Yisrael Chai. We are good. We are fine. We are alive. And I'm not saying we're not allowed to be critical of ourselves and our people and internally look at the things that we may or may not do right or wrong. But it's very interesting to me to find the people who, and I always say it must be horrible to be Jewish when you don't want to be Jewish. Like for me, I'm Jewish and I'm very happy to be. So I know what comes along with it. But the poor Jew who their last name is Cohen, their last name is Levy, but all they wish they were was Christopher Brown, life must be horrible because you get all the bad parts of being Jewish and you really don't get any of the benefits. So what does Mordechai tell her? If you're going to remain silent, you think the Jewish people are dependent on you. Let me tell you, Esther. If you're going to be silent, the Jewish people will survive. It says, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The Jewish people were a nation of eternity. We will make it through. We've made it through before. We've been beaten before. We've been broken. We've been massacred. We'll make it through. You know who's not going to make it to the other side? You. Va'at ubet avich tovedu. You and your whole lineage is just going to be obliterated from the Jewish people. He says, and who knows if this is the only reason you were sent to serve the Jewish people. I think a lot of times people let power get to their head. And they don't realize that position can be filled by many capable human beings. And if you're not going to rise to the occasion, in the big scheme of things, it's not going to damage the people as much as it's going to damage and shame your character. And that's something that Esther really takes to heart. This epiphany of, wow, it's not about me. The Jewish people, my people, need me to step up the plate. And right now, I have the ability to do it. And if I don't do it, they'll be okay. But you know who won't be okay? I won't be okay. I won't be okay. My father's house, my family, because what I was placed in the position of power for to begin with, and then I didn't stand up, so what was I good for to begin with? And Esther does. She stands up and she says, you know what? I will go, but it's conditional. What is the condition? Look at Pasuk Tet Zayin. She tells Mordechai, Lech kinos et kol hayudim. For those of you familiar, in many Sephardic worlds, the Bet HaKnesset was not called a Bet HaKnesset. What was it called? It's called a knis. Why? The word knis, likanes, means to gather. It was a place where we gathered. Lech knos et kol hayudim. Go gather all the Jewish people, hanimtzaim b'Shushan, that are here in the capital city. Vitzumu alai. You go fast. V'al tochlu, don't eat. V'al tishtu, don't drink. Shiloshot yamim laila vayom, 3 days, night and day. V'gam ani v'narotai, me and my maidservants were also going to fast. And then I'll go to the king, and whatever will happen, will happen. You find that Esther's response is, I'm willing to go up to the plate. I'm willing to put myself on the line. But it's conditional. The condition is I need the Jewish people to be involved. I am not willing to save people who don't want to be saved. I am not willing to be the superwoman who swoops in to save the victims that don't want to help themselves. Go to the Jewish people and tell them, I need them. Now, I think there are two different sides to this. Number one is the benefit. So let's talk about the benefit, the danger, and then a different angle completely. For those of you who ever were team leaders, you know that the difference between your team working well versus it falling apart is your ability to delegate. If you don't know how to properly delegate, what will end up happening is everything will rest on your shoulders. And ultimately, it's your project. Why should I care about it? You see, the moment you delegate something to me, I'm now invested in the cause. I now also care. And if I also care, I have an ego. I also want to succeed. To the extent that you're able to spread the task, and you should know it's not easy. Rachel, are you on? Yeah, Rachel's there. Rachel knows. In the beginning years, my biggest struggle was people would come for Shabbat Friday night and ask me in the kitchen, can I help? And my knee-jerk response is, the greatest help is get out of my kitchen. I like to do it on my own. I know where everything is. I know where I put it. It sounds silly. I know how I like my cucumbers cut. I know which shape and size the tomatoes should be. And then I realized really quickly that part of inviting people and making them feeling warm and welcome is also letting them be a part of it. And you know what I've come to discover over the last 10 years? It doesn't really matter if the size of the cucumbers is not even. And it doesn't really matter if they put the ladle in the wrong spot, because I can always move it. In the bigger scheme of things, when you're in a position where you're creating a team, it's really important to learn how to delegate and have people interact, because it can't just fall on your shoulders. It's your responsibility too. If you're part of this team, you also have to pick up some of the slack. The danger. one day, Bezrat Hashem, I'm going to delegate it to you too. I have to tell you about Rachel. One day when Elchanan and Avinom were very little, we were coming up to the Bet Knesset, and I said to Avinom, I said, come, we're going to our Bet Knesset. And he looks at me, he said, it's not our Bet Knesset. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, what does that mean? He said, no, it belongs to Rachel. It's Rachel's Bet Knesset. So I agree, Rachel. But you find over here something that can be very dangerous. The moment you delegate is the moment people now also feel that they have an opinion. And for those of you that know the expression, too many cooks spoil the broth, it's true. Suddenly, instead of saying, hey, these were the 5 tasks that I delegated, and this is how they need to be done, now everybody has a new opinion of how they should be done, what should be done. And suddenly, very quickly, you have a situation that we call in Hebrew, Eved Kimloch, when a servant becomes a king. You know, when a king becomes a king and a prince becomes a king, they know they're in charge, so they don't have to be cruel. It's always the servant who then becomes a king that always has this, we today call it an imposter syndrome. They always feel like they don't belong, and in order to prove it, they're crueler, they're meaner, they're nastier. So the flip side is, a good leader has to understand not just how to delegate, but also how to still remain in this hierarchical pyramid that does exist. In the end of the day, when there's leadership, as horizontal as you want it to be, there's still somebody that takes the lead. And it has to be done with a lot of ingenuity of, tell the Jewish people they should go fast. Tell them that they should go do teshuvah. But also let them know that I'm the one who's going to be the spokeswoman. I'm the one who's going to the king. I'm the one who will take care of the matters over here. And that requires a very fine delicate of knowing how to create a team, but also still leading the team. And very often you find people are good at one and not the other. They're either really good at saying, smoch alai, right? Rely on me. I'm going to do everything on my own. You don't have to do anything. But then they complain. Their hand hurts, their head hurts, their back hurts. They didn't sleep. You never asked. You have people who are very good at the flip side, which is they know how to delegate everything, but then they don't know how to pull the strings together to create a cohesive team. And you end up with tremendous chaos. Because when you have everybody who, I think I shared this with you. Once President Truman got onto a phone call with Golda Meir. And they were talking about politics. And at one point, President Truman says to Golda Meir, you know, excuse me, Prime Minister, but I don't think you know what it's like to run a country with a couple of million people. And she responds to him and says, you know, dear President, you're right, but I don't think you know what it's like to run a country with a couple of 100,000 prime ministers. And the truth is, that's a really tough thing. Everybody thinks they know how to do it better. Everybody has better ideas. You find you need that balance. Another thing that Esther does, something a little different. She tells the Jewish people, I need you to help yourself so I can help you. For those of you familiar, tell me what learned helplessness means.
Person or an animal that tried repeatedly to free themselves from a situation that was unwanted. Like example, baby elephant with a chain on its leg, it tries to walk away, and they don't even need to put a chain on this massive adult elephant. No help is coming. You will not be able to walk away.
It's a that's a perfect explanation, Tikva. You can obviously tell that you work with children, and it's a very tragic thing, which is you take a human being who they believe they're capable of everything, and through usually coercion and force, you train them to believe we can't do anything. In fact, so much so, you find something very interesting. Over here, Mordechai's response to hearing about the decree is he goes out into the street and he screams, right? If you look in Shemot, when the Jewish people are in Egypt, it doesn't say they screamed. The word he uses is vaye'anchu et bnei Israel min ha'avodah kasha. They sighed. It was silent. There was no sound. You only find that the Jews start screaming once Moshe Rabbeinu comes and tells them, I'm going to emancipate you. I am going to free you. That's when it says, Vanitzak el Adonai vatal shavatam. They start screaming. And I once read a beautiful interpretation from the Bet Aaron. The Bet Aaron is one of the Stoliner Hasidic rabbis, the dynasty that my family is not a Hasidim. Okay, so they're not part of the dynastical part. So he says something very interesting. Why did the Jewish people start screaming once Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm coming to free you? The ability to scream is the ability to feel, is the ability to feel freedom. Before the Jewish people knew that they were going to be saved, they had no hope, and therefore they only sighed. It was only once they actually started feeling hopeful, they could cry, they could scream. And you find this a lot, unfortunately, when people are going through a rough time. Very often, when the trauma is so great, in order to survive, they shut off the main valve. What do I mean, the main valve? Suddenly, they go on autopilot. You talk to them, it almost seems like they're not going through anything. They become robotic. They're not happy. They're not sad. They're nothing. Their mood is flat. It's only after the trauma, and sometimes even after they're unable to rehabilitate, but with enough therapy and help, when they're finally able to unlock their emotions, wow, that's when suddenly they start crying and having nightmares. And to us, it almost seems like, wait, they were doing so much better during the trauma. Why are they doing so poorly now? To the contrary. When people don't even make the noise, that's when you know it's so dangerous. In fact, I was once with somebody in an emergency room in Brooklyn. And, Brooklyn is not San Diego. Suffice it to say. I once had a nurse when I was giving birth with I think the twins. They were trying to find the line for IV, and I guess my veins are a little small. So they called one nurse, another nurse, the third nurse that came, and she looks at me, she's like, look, I'm from New York. I'm not nice, but I know how to find veins. I'm like, listen, honey, I'm from Brooklyn. I don't care. Just find the vein and do it. But I remember when I was in Brooklyn, it was packed, okay? So we're talking about there were no beds. There were hundreds of people, and everybody, it was interesting. Everyone had their own little curtain. And I asked the nurse, how do you know who to go to? And they said, to be honest, there are so many people here that those who scream the loudest normally get the most attention. He said, but it's wrong because usually the ones who are the most silent are the ones who need the most help. Because if you have the ability to scream so much, you're okay. It's when you don't have the ability to even ask anymore. That's when it's so dangerous. You find over here that Esther is empowering the people. She says, I am not going to help you out of this situation. I am not your horse, right? I'm not the knight in shining armor coming, riding, saving you, swooping down. You need to be actively involved in getting yourself help. You find something similar when Moshe Rabbeinu is standing at the Yam Suf. Tell me what happens over there. The Jews left Egypt. They're about, right? 3 days in, they see that Paro, the Chelo, are all following them in the back. In front of them, they have the Yam Suf. What happens? What do the Jewish people do? What is Moshe's response?
Right.
They said, like, weren't there enough, time, like, Olivia and Carmen's time, like, why do we have to come here to that?
Oh, very good. You heard what they said? It's amazing. You just got out of maximum prison. You were there for 210 years. They were killing you. They were murdering us, right? Being in Egypt was not all parties and fun. And yet we go out and we so quickly forget. So right away they turn to Moshe and they say, Hamibli en kvarim b'Mitzrayim, were there not enough graves in Egypt? Couldn't you just let us die there? What did you bring us out here? What is Moshe Rabbeinu's response to them? What does he do? Oh, very good. If you look, let's go into Parshat Bishalach. We'll look inside, you'll see it. Look at Parshat Bishalach. Look at, so it's going to be in Shemot Yud Dalid, Pasuk Yud Aleph. They tell Moshe Rabbeinu, like you said, Chani, Vayomeru al Moshe, and they say to Moshe, Hamibli en kvarim b'Mitzrayim, were there not enough graves in Egypt? Lakachtanu lamut b'midbar, so you took us out to the desert to die? Seriously, if we were going to be killed, why didn't you just leave us there? It would have been an easier, faster, painless death. Why did you take us out? This is exactly what we were afraid of. We already told you then. Leave us alone. This is good for us. Yeah, we're being oppressed. Yeah, we're being hurt. Doesn't matter. We're used to this. We know this. They always say, be aware of the beast that you replaced the first one with. I think I butchered that saying, but something to that effect, which is very often you think you're going to improve life, and before thinking it through, you make a massive change, and then things get worse. And they say, smile, things can get worse. So I smiled, and things got worse. Very often the things that we think today are, don't jump and make change so quickly. Make change, but think it through. So what happens? Pasuk Yud Gimel. Vayomer Moshe la'am, he tells the nation, Al tirau, don't be afraid. Hityatzvu u'ru et Yeshuat Adonai. Just stand still, watch. You're going to see how Hashem helps us. He then says, Pasuk Tet Yudaled, Adonai yilachem lachem v'atem tacharishun. You just remain silent. Let's not inspire mass hysteria. Quiet down. Hashem will fight for us. What is Hashem's response? Look at Pasuk Tet Vav. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, Ma titzak elai? Why are you coming to scream to me? Daber el bnei Israel v'yasau. Speak to the Jewish people and do something. Moshe Rabbeinu, now is not a time for prayer. You are not helpless. You want to be saved? Do something. Don't stand there and shake back and forth. Don't start baking chalot and tying red strings. Do something. Do something. Now, if you're going to bake the chalot and then give them out to poor people to eat, okay, at least you did something. There's a time, Shlomo HaMelech says, Lakol zman va'et. There's a time and place for everything. There's a time for happiness. There's a time for sadness. Et milchama, right? Ve'et shalom. There's a time for war. There's a time for peace. You can't mix up things. When it's wartime, it's not peacetime. When it's time to do something, it's not time to be quiet. When it's time for action, it's not time for prayer. Now, yes, could you pray and act together? Sure. But this helpless attitude, what could I do? What do you mean what we could do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu empowered us with the ability to do. For those of you not familiar, I highly recommend, Rav Yonatan has a class from last year's Purim in the writings of, I believe, Rabbi Moshe Toledano, on what the Jewish people are meant to do during wartime, on what the Jewish people are meant to do in Galut, instead of just being sitting ducks. Yes, I highly recommend you listen to it. But you find a similar thread over here where Esther says, I'm not going to help you unless you're going to help yourself. I'm willing to do the bulk of the work. I'm willing to do the dangerous work. What I'm not willing to do is let you be the victim. You're not going to wallow in your victimhood as much as get up, do something. Even if the something is minimal, do something. I want to share with you, there's an interesting Gemara. For those of you who would like, you can open it Sefaria. For those of you who don't, you're welcome to listen. If you open up in your Sefaria, go to Talmud. It'll be in Talmud Bavli, Masechet Berachot, and it's going to be Berachot Daf Hey. So it's going to be the fifth. Let's find it over here. Here. Amud Hey, and then, Amud Bet, and it's going to be B. So 5B. If you look at 5B, towards the middle, it's a story. It starts in the middle, where the Chachamim are having an interesting conversation about pain and suffering and its purpose. And it interjects a story over here. It starts off with a story about Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Chia bar Abba gets sick, and he is a student of Rabbi Yochanan. He gets sick, and Rabbi Yochanan comes to visit him. Amar lo, and he says to him, Chavivin alecha yisurin? He says, is the suffering and pain something not that you enjoy? Okay, the word chaviv meaning, do you find that they're rectifying something, they're doing something for you? Amar le, he says to him, lo, no, not the suffering, not the pain. I don't like them, not as an atonement, not as a reward. They're not doing anything to me. So what does he tell him? He says, havli yadcha, give me your hand, and he helps him sit up and he heals him. Yes? So this is the first exchange between Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan. Later on, we find that Rabbi Yochanan himself gets sick. So now Rabbi Yochanan is laying in his bed, and his student comes to visit him. Rabbi Yochanan gets sick, and his student, Rabbi Chanina, remember Ben Dota? By the way, I'm going to throw it out there. There's a phenomenal series. It's meant for kids, I would say like Elchanan, 9, 10-year-olds. I think it's good for adults as well. Feldheim has published. It's called the Tanaim series. It's in comic form, but it's accurate to the stories of the Gemara. They have a whole series on all the Tanaim, fascinating stories that most people have never even accessed, let alone read, known. And it really builds the personality for you because it extracts from the Gemara much of the stories that we know of the Tanaim, not just their halachic readings. So here we have Rabbi Chanina is now sick. Rabbi Yochanan gets sick, and his student, Rabbi Chanina, comes to him, and he asks him the same question. Tell me about these yisurin. Now that you're the patient, do you see value in suffering and pain? He says, no. Not as an atonement, not as a reward. So he tells him, Havli yadech, give me your hand. Just like Rabbi Yochanan did for his student. He gives him his hand, he helps him up, and he heals him. And the Gemara is perplexed. If Rabbi Yochanan was able to heal his student, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, why didn't he heal himself? Why do he need to wait for his student now, Rabbi Chanina, to come and heal him? And the Gemara tells us a fascinating line. It says, En chavush matir atzmo mi bet ha'asurin or asurin. Somebody who's in prison doesn't have the ability to unshackle themselves. Even if you have the ability to heal somebody else, very often when it comes to yourself, the same things you're capable, willing, and able to do for somebody else, you're not able to give yourself. That is human nature. Very often people get upset at themselves. I don't understand. I could take care of the whole world. Why don't I know how to take care of myself? That's precisely it. When you are trapped, it's very difficult for you to go and open the door. But the person right outside the door, they have no problem. It's easy. It's really easy when you're looking at somebody else. It's why Chachamim tell us, it says, Takshiv oznecha, ma shepicha medaber. Let your ears hear what your mouth is speaking. I find this a lot. Sometimes I'm speaking to clients, to people, and I'm like, wow, that's really great wisdom. If only I would internalize it and listen to my own advice, that would be phenomenal. But that's it. That's the hard part. I remember when 6 weeks after. So 6 weeks after I had Yael, it didn't start 6 weeks after. It started 2 years before. But 6 weeks after, my gallbladder got infected. And thankfully, I was rushed into surgery. And I remember as I was being wheeled down, so they prep you, And then you go down. I had to say goodbye. My husband was there. Esther was there. And suddenly you're in a room where it's just you. And I remember a few feelings. So the first one was like, wow, I wonder if this is what it feels like after 120, where a whole life we're surrounded with people. And then at a certain point, it's just you. It's just you. Now you're on your own. Now you have to stand on your own 2 feet. Now you have to be able to say, I am responsible for everything because I have no excuses. I have nobody to back me up. Nobody's going to cover for my story. So that was one very humbling feeling. The second one was, I then understood what it means that we should pray for other people. Why? Because here I was going to be wheeled into surgery, and thank God, a very minor surgery. I've recovered since, everything's great. But that feeling of, I'm going to go under the knife, they're going to put anesthesia, and I'm out. I have no ability to care for myself. I have no ability to pray for myself. But I know that upstairs in the room that I left 2 people who are very beloved to me, they have a siddur. They have a tehillim. They're praying for me because I can't help myself. And I think sometimes we underestimate that, which is sometimes a person is so stuck somewhere that yes, we want to help them out. But part of us helping them is saying, I'm here on the other side. I know you're right now not capable of doing something for yourself. I'll be there doing it for you. You should know that was very comforting to me, to know I can't pray right now. I practically can't. I'm out. But there are other people who really care about me. They're praying for me. They care about me. Because I'm the chavush. I'm the one now in prison who doesn't know how to take themselves out. I want to share with you. First, a quote. Okay, first, no. I share with you with mixed feelings, okay? And I'm going to disclose my bias here. When I was single, I once went to my uncle, who was my most beloved mentor and has passed since. And he was the kind of uncle, his name was Shlomo Kupitz. And I say Shlomo Kupitz, he was Rabbi Shlomo Kupitz, who had thousands of students. But for us, he was just our uncle, who was able to say the most outlandish things, and I say outlandish in the best way, because he was not afraid of anybody. When I think about him, the pasuk of lo tagur mipnei ish, don't be afraid of anybody, that's what I would label him as. He was not afraid to say things the way they were, to make fun of the authorities when they needed to challenge things and social norms, and he was entrenched in the Hasidic community of Borough Park. He was the one who told me to actually study these books, and I loved them. I loved them until, unfortunately, when I was in Israel, for those of you who remember, the horrible episode in Emmanuel. For those of you unfamiliar, you can go look it up. But there was a group of Slonimer Hasidim who ended up getting the Sephardic girls thrown out of school, building walls. And it was all under the guise of, obviously, this is for Torah and religion, when it just boiled down to, and they even got some Sephardic Jews from Shas to sign on, so it looked like it was really just a religious issue. Chevra, do your research. All it was good old racism. I have to tell you, for me, that was very hard. Because though I was not even dating my husband, watching that episode unfold was very hard. And when I say I still love the books of the Netivot Shalom, or really, it's the Nesiva Shalom, we say. Reb Shalom Noach Berzovsky, ultimately he was the Admol, he was the grand rabbi of the Slonimer Hasidim, not alive when this took place, okay? I add that introduction because as much as I tremendously appreciate his works on Hasidut, I tremendously struggle with his Hasidim of today. I'm not telling you it's exclusive to them. Simply, that story for me was very hard. If you look in Tehillim, you know what? We have a Tanakh. Why don't you open Tehillim Kuf Mem Bet 142. Yes, open your Tehillim. Let's look inside. And one day we're going to learn Tehillim together, God willing. Tehillim is, most people just chant it and mumble it. If you learn the words of Tehillim, your life will change forever in the best way possible. But you have to learn it. One day, God willing. Od Chazon HaMoed. Look at Kuv Mem Bet. So this is when David HaMelech is trapped in a cave I believe, yeah, he's crying out to Hashem. He's trapped now in a cave. I believe he's running away from Shaul HaMelech, but I could be mistaken. It may be Avshalom, but I think it's Shaul HaMelech. So he says, Maski le David, bioto ba'ma'arat tefillah. He's praying from the inside of a cave, being run out of town, persecuted. And I want you to look at the pasuk chet. He says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hotziam mimasger nafshi. Take me out of the shackles of my soul, lehodot et shemecha, so that I can sing the praise of you. And then the Tivot Shalom says, there are all kinds of prisons, right? Somebody doesn't pay their penalties. They could end up in small court, Supreme Court, prisons. Somebody could be under house arrest. Somebody could just wear an anklet. These are all types of different imprisonment. He says the greatest prison a human being can find themselves is one that they live in their minds and in their hearts, where they've created these walls and barriers that nobody can scale, that nobody can transcend. Because a prison is just really a physical place. But when a human being entraps themselves, and very often it's with the help of other people who get them to that poor state of being, those are the hardest shackles to break. When we start believing things about ourselves, when we start limiting ourselves, when we start putting ourselves into prison, we become the chavush that can't take themselves out. We become prisoners that are so stuck behind these fortresses that we've built, that even when people come and try to find us, they don't know where to look. And David HaMelech says, Hashem, I'm begging you. The cave, I'll get out of eventually. The moat that was built, I'll learn how to cross that bridge when I get there. But the prison of my mind, the prison of my soul, only you know how to lock. Only you know how to take me out of there. And you should know very often we see today people who on the outside, you wouldn't think that they're in prison. But they walk around 24/7 living in hell. And this is not a blame game. But it's a hell of anxiety, of depression, of sadness, of loneliness, of hurt, of shame, you name it. But they live behind these bars that are invisible. And that's probably the hardest part. Because if we knew you were living there, maybe we'd try to come and help you out. You see, I always think about this with physical illness and mental health. When somebody's physically ill, it's very obvious. You could see. And therefore, people have a tremendous amount of compassion and care and solutions. When it comes to the things that go on in a person's heart, in their minds, in their soul, only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows. Only Hashem knows how to read what's going on down in the deepest recesses of you. And it's hard because sometimes the people who need the most are the least likely to ask. Harriet Tubman, when she was asked how she feels about saving people, right? We know Harriet Tubman was famously known for the Underground Railroad, where she helped thousands of slaves. And she said, I saved 1,000 people. She said, but I could have saved 1,000 more had they only known that they were slaves. And I think that's something very powerful. We're looking at Esther. We're looking at somebody who, in her leadership, not just faithfulness to the Jewish community, but in her ability to say, you need to first save yourselves. Am Yisrael, if you have any chance of fighting this war and getting out, we need to restore in you hope. We need to restore faith. We need to give you back power. We need to engage you and say, Chevron, we're not emasculated. We're not sitting ducks. And if we are, come, let's help each other out. Because even if we are sitting in the prison and the shackles that we've created, it says, Ish et re'ehu ya'azoru, u'la'achiv yomar chazak. Everybody should turn to their friend, to their partner, and say, you know what? I see the prison walls you put up. I see the fortress you hide behind. I'm coming to help you out. I'm coming to help you out because I don't want you to die in solitary confinement. I don't want you to live there forever, where you're part of a world and yet you're all alone. We need you for the war effort. But the only way we can recruit you is we first have to get you to come out. And I believe that that's an important message, not just for Megillat Esther, but really for current events, where we're looking at a world. The world needs us. The world needs us. And we need the world. That's the truth. We need the world. We need to be able to look at each other and say, you can't help yourself out of prison. I can't help myself out of my shackles. We could help each other. We could do things for each other that we can't do for ourselves. And that's a gift that we give to humanity. It's the ability to say, I am no longer letting everybody stay in solitary confinement. I am no longer letting, under the guise of independence and the guise of freedom, I'm no longer letting everybody live in their own self-made prisons. It's time for us to come out. It's time for us to come back out. And I know, so, during COVID, we were all about social distancing, and we were all about, let's keep everybody, forget about arm's reach apart, very, very far. And I think I'm not judging why we did it. Okay, I understand that a world was responding to tremendous chaos, and it's easy for us to reflect in hindsight and figure out what was right and what was wrong. What I simply believe is that now our job is to rehabilitate the world. We've taught everybody so well how to distance, how to isolate, how to stay apart. Now our job is to undo that. Our job is to learn how to take down the barriers, to take off the masks, to take off all the things that it says, I think it's in Tehillim, the masechot shel barzel, the masks of iron that separate human beings one from the other. To let ourselves create a world that is safe to be vulnerable in. Because we cannot tell people to be vulnerable in a dangerous world. That's asking people to commit suicide. You understand? We first have to create a world that is safe and good and healthy, and then we can encourage each other, come back out. Come follow the model of leadership where the Jewish people go me'evel liyom tov, from sadness to joy. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר. I'm blessing all of us. I know Purim is a little bit out, but Purim miracles could come sooner. We're not so makbid. We're not going to be so strict if God brings the miracle anytime sooner. And I believe the miracle is not His. It's the miracle for us to believe that we are capable, that we are also part of the story. We know that specifically women, it says, right? So we're not bound. We are not obligated in time-bound mitzvot. Yes? We are obligated, though, in Purim. Why? What's our obligation? Very simply. Why? Why are women obligated?
Because we experienced miracles.
Very good. Because we were part of the miracle. And I'd like to say that we are the miracle. Okay? So whether in your distorted view you want Vashti to be your heroine, if I'm going to choose Esther, that's fine. In the end of the day, it says, B'schut nashim tzidkaniot nigalu avotenu mimitzrayim. It was because of the Jewish women that we got out the first time. U'v'schut nashim atidot lihigael. And it's going to be up to us the second time around. And I wholly believe that. This is not a, we hate them. I simply believe that if anybody is going to be able to say, guys, it's time to put down our swords. It's time to put down, first it's time to fight. Yes, but after we fight and we win, now it's time to put down our swords. Now it's time to turn them into, it says, v'chitetu chalvotam leitim. The Navi tells us that one day we're going to be able to put our swords down and we will have so little use for it, we're going to turn them into plows for the earth because we will have no need to fight. And I'm wishing all of Am Yisrael, now is a sha'at milchama. Now is a time for fighting. We have to stop being quiet. We have to stop being victims, and we have to start becoming victorious. And I'm blessing all of us. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu. The one who brings peace should bring peace on us, and when there's peace for us, it continues. V'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. I'm blessing not just the Jewish people with peace, but a world of peace, a world where we're able to say, I don't need to be in prison anymore, because it's a beautiful world. Chazak u'baruch. Thank you for learning with me.